How much our lives are predetermined by genes? What are the boundaries within we can evolve and change ourselves? And how these boundaries shift throughout the life? This video may make you doubt your idea of life, but it can also help you to look at the world from another perspective, which leads to better understanding of yourself and others. You'll learn what twins can teach us, what influences us more, the environment and the way we were raised, or genes. Why siblings are so different. Why the saying that you should look at your girlfriend's mom if you want to know what she will be like in the future makes sense. Let's go. The influence of genetics is discussed very actively today. For the last decades, many studies results were collected, and these results make a big fuss in society. They even call resentment and denial because they break the established concepts of existence that humanity followed for thousands of years. The video is mostly based on works of Robert Plumin, who's a British-American psychologist and geneticist. He's not just a random guy, he's considered one of the top 100 most outstanding psychologists in history of the science, according to American Psychologists Association. The product of his 30 years of studies is the book Blueprint. The book has become a bestseller right after publishing in 2018. But it provoked a great wave of hate because the results presented there were terrifying and hard to accept. Not once he was even called a Nazi for just sharing the results of his studies. Yeah, scientific facts that inherently mirror nature can be cruel, especially when they are connected with human ethics. Let's start with base. The main object of studies of geneticists is DNA. That you've obviously heard of, but let me remind you that it's a molecule that carries genetic instructions for the development, functioning, growth, and reproduction of all known organisms and many viruses. The molecule is very stable and can stay undamaged for thousands of years. The oldest DNA that has been found is 2 million years. DNA is sort of code of life that every living being has. Your height, metabolism, hair, eyes, skin color, all of that is coded in DNA. But it's important to understand that there is no separate fragment of DNA that is responsible for a separate characteristic. Like there is no special gene that makes your hair dark. The information is spread all over the DNA. By the way, did you know that genetically speaking, 99.9% of us human beings are similar? It's only 0.1% that makes us different. And this is the exact percent that is studied by scientists. Yes, we accept that the apple never falls far from the tree, in terms of appearance. But when we speak about our personality, well, not everyone understands the correlation in terms of psychology. As geneticist and psychologist, Professor Plumin focuses on the interrelation between DNA and environmental influence. That allows him to study how these two factors build our personality. The story, definitely worth mentioning, happened in USA. One day, a guy named Bobby arrived on the campus of a New York community college for the first time and was surprised to be constantly greeted by students and staff as Eddie. Imagine his confusion. He has never been in the place before. Suddenly, one of the students ran to him, looked at him in astonishment, and asked if he was adopted. Quite an unexpected question. Turned out the student appeared to be a good friend of absolutely same-looking guy, but named Eddie. To convince the suggestion, the boys immediately drove to the Eddie. After a couple of hours, they met and, finding out both had been adopted, quickly concluded that they were twins. It's hard to believe, but months later, the publicity of this human interest story reached David, whose resemblance and matching adoption circumstances indicated that the three were actually identical triplets. There is a movie about this story. It's called Three Identical Strangers. If you want to dive deep into the topic, I recommend you to watch the movie. So, the triplet brothers found themselves alike in many ways. They had the same taste in food and women, smoked the same brand of cigarettes, all wrestled in high school, spoke at the same time and often the same things. They quickly became a minor media sensation, appearing on talk shows and newspapers. All three had struggled with mental health problems for years, and one of them even died by suicide following a diagnosis with manic depressive disorder. However, upon further investigations, it was revealed that the infants had been initially separated and placed with families having different parenting style and economic levels. One blue-collar, one middle class, and one upper class. Turned out that the triplet brothers had been involved as children in a study by psychiatrist Peter B. Neubauer and Viola Bernard, which involved periodic visits and evaluations of the boys, the full intent of which never was explained to the adoptive parents. The experiment intended to find out how much nature and environment affects us. The brothers were not the only ones involved in the study. Later, some more twins found each other after years of separation. What is worse, that there are still twins that don't know about each other's existence, because the results of the studies have never been disclosed, neither by the adoption agency nor by psychiatric team. After the documentary about the study have been released, the brothers have been granted an access to heavily redacted results of the experiment. Whether the results will be ever published, no one knows. But we must understand that this study is one of a kind. It will never be repeated simply because today we find it terribly unethical. But why would experimenters want to separate twins at all? Twins have been of interest to scholars since early civilization, including the early physician Hippocrates. So the sensational experiment was reasonable, just from our point of view rather cruel. Twins are a valuable source for observation because they allow to study environmental influence and varying genotype. Identical or monozygotic twins share essentially 100% of their genes, which means that most differences between the twins are due to experiences that one twin has, but not the other twin. Fraternal or dizygotic twins share only about 50% of their genes, just as any other sibling. Twins also share many aspects of their environment. For example, uterine environment, parenting style, education, wealth, culture, community, because they are born into the same family. But twin method itself doesn't allow us to analyze the pure influence of genes without the environment. For example, when we speak about school achievements of a child, we look at his family. If the child does well at school, for decades people said that it's just nurture, good upbringing. Those parents provided a good environment for their kid. But when we think about genetics and the fact that they share 50% of their genes, there comes a question. Could it be simply nature? In this case, scientists refer to adoption studies that typically compare pairs of persons. For example, adopted child and adoptive mother, or adopted child and biological mother, to assess genetic and environmental influence on behavior. Therefore, these two methods combined helped the researchers to divide the influence of nature and nurture that allowed them to come to interesting results. Imagine a family with adopted child. What do you think would be correlation between the child's and his parents' weight? 0. There is no resemblance between adopted child's weight and adoptive parents' weight. That means that a child and adoptive parents who eat the same food can have absolutely different shapes. At the same time, the correlation of weight with biological parents is 70%, even if the child has never met them. Of course, you're not doomed to be overweight if your parents are. You can stick to a diet or do sport, but it's likely that for you it would be more difficult to be fit than for other people. Some say that if you want to marry someone, first look at their parents. If they're divorced, think twice, because in this case, the likelihood of your divorce will be much higher. This seems strange, but it's pure statistical truth. The most obvious explanation would be that if a child's parents are divorced, the child didn't have a good model of stable relationships in front of them, or the child was forming a psychological trauma that will unconsciously repeat the parents' scenario in adult life. Surprisingly, this isn't entirely true. A recent adoption study conducted in Sweden showed that the link between parents' divorce and their child's divorce is genetically embedded rather than influenced by the environment. To find this out, they took 20,000 people who were adopted at the very young age and looked at their marriages and the marriages of the biological parents. And it turns out that… Well, imagine you live in a foster family and know nothing about your biological parents. But if your biological parents suddenly divorce, then the likelihood of your divorce will be much higher than if your foster parents that have actually raised you divorce. Yes, the heritability of divorces is about 40% according to all studies. That is far from 100%, which means that the external factors still play a big part. But the only systematic factor that can be detected is the heritability or genetics. Researchers started to study environmental factors that could be causes of divorce. There must be something else besides genetics that unitize those prone to divorce. Maybe the family income, influence of friends, desire to travel. Turns out there isn't. Precisely, everything else is entirely individual. As we see, parents' divorce is the best and indeed the only reliable predictor of children's divorce. I'll clarify. You may have a perfect match. No one of your parents have been divorced, but suddenly something comes to your partner's mind and they want to break up. This will leave an impact, but it's unpredictable, unstable, and singular. So we say that we don't know how the environment affects, although it of course somehow chaotically does. And of course there is no divorce gene, as there is no gene that makes people bad partners for stable marriages. It's all about genetically conditioned personality traits. Moreover, those who are passionate about life, joyful, emotional, and positive are more likely to divorce. These people don't seem like bad partners at all. For many, these characteristics are rather attractive and are actually a reason to marry them. Now, I hope you're ready for what comes next, because I'm going to express an incredibly unpleasant and controversial thought that will surely provoke a wave of indignation. It's about upbringing in general. Blomin writes that despite all efforts, there's been no evidence found whatsoever that upbringing works in any way. There's no evidence of the influence of the environment, not only for traditional personality traits like extroversion or neuroticism, but also for traits that may seem to be 100% parental merit. For example, altruism, caring, and kindness, even a trait like patience, which has always been considered a sign of excellent upbringing, show the same results as other personality traits. A deep analysis demonstrates that the influence of family members on each other does not affect individual differences between them. Family members are similar in all psychological traits not because of upbringing, but because of genetics. Growing up with a brother or sister doesn't make you more or less like them than it's predetermined in your DNA. This shocks and incites denial. It's especially unpleasant for those parents who put a lot of effort and money into their children, perhaps even send them in private schools to study. But according to Blomin, among behavioral geneticists, this has long been an undeniable axiom. For several decades, they have been literally searching for anything that could be attributed to such a serious systematic influence of the external environment. So far, in vain. Here I would like to touch on a more acute problem. Geneticists in the second half of the last century and to this day have had very hard times. You couldn't take a step without being called a Nazi if you just started about the influence of genes on the intelligence. Blomin wrote his book for 30 years, not just because he collected the multi-year data from twin studies, but also because speaking about it and publishing the articles about it was simply dangerous. Although many people will clearly be outraged by Blomin's statements, probably without delving deeply into the subject. And those who have a monetary interest in all of that will shout even louder about the determinism, eugenics, and fascism. There are many types of cognitive abilities, such as verbal and spatial. But in reality, you are more likely to possess one if you have the other. For instance, Individuals with higher memorization abilities typically have higher abilities across all other forms of intelligence. People often think that they excel in only one area, like physics or literature, but they are likely to excel in both. In social terms, intelligence is the best predictor of educational achievements and professional status, and it's strongly inherited. However, it simply cannot be independent of the family you are born into. If you are fortunate to be born into a wealthy family, you'll have tutors hired for you, attend private schools, and eventually end up in leadership positions. Even in poor families, parents can engage with their children, for example, by reading books to them. Indeed, the amount of reading parents do with their children correlates with how well the children perform in school. However, it's crucial to understand the cause and effect here. For example, we can say that since parents and children are genetically related by 50%, parents who love reading will have children who love reading, or children predisposed to a love of reading elicit a positive response from parents when they read, listening attentively, asking questions, and expressing emotions, which motivates parents to read to their children more often and for longer periods. Eventually, children may ask their parents to read to them themselves. What I want to say is that children can be genetically predisposed to reading and therefore to learning. And this is the reason why they read more, and not that the parents accustom them to that. These principles can as well be applied to school education. Schools teach basic skills such as literacy and numeracy and provide fundamental information about history, natural science, mathematics, and culture. The curriculum is the same, but children vary greatly in their school achievements. We are accustomed to think that everything depends on the school and teachers, but according to research, differences in academic achievement are almost independent of which school pupil attend. Listen, there's a significant overlap between academic performance indicators in the best and worst schools. In other words, some children from the worst schools outperform children from the best schools. And the differences in academic performance between boys and girls actually don't exceed 1%. Same goes for class size. It seems logical that the fewer students there are, the more attention the teacher can give, and the better the students' results will be. However, this can only increase performance on average by 1%. No less interesting question is, with age, the influence of genetics increases or weakens? Logically thinking, it weakens, isn't it? Everyone follows their individual path. Throughout the life, we soak the external influence. Schools, partners, jobs, friends, everything we experience in life leaves an imprint and forms us until we realize that all that happens to us, we form ourselves. In other words, every decision that we make in life is made in coherence with our DNA. As an example, we can take any pupil at school. According to his genetically determined cognitive abilities, he demonstrates interest for specific subjects, may constantly be distracted or listen to a teacher with attention. At home, he can make minimum homework just to escape punishment, or he can read extra, watch YouTube or documentaries, expanding the knowledge out of school program and improving his intelligence. What about friends, relationships, and job? I think you already guessed. So, the more decisions are made, the deeper we dive into our personal vicious circle created by our DNA. The results of studying of 11,000 twins showed that heritability of intelligence increases from childhood to early adulthood from 40 to 65%. In 2013, meta-analysis has combined the results of all the intelligence researchers and confirmed the conclusion that the influence of genes increases in the course of life. A few more studies of further aging show that the influence continues growing. This fact can please or terrify, I guess, depending on the way you see your parents and the way they live. So probably it's worth working on acceptance of your relatives, because with age you will see more and more of them inside of yourself. We may come to a logical conclusion that smart people will have smart kids and kids from families on the other side of spectrum are doomed. And we would be wrong. There will never be a kind of smart asses and kind of jackasses. The phenomenon of regression towards the means won't let that happen. This phenomenon describes the fact that tall parents have shorter kids, or parents with IQ 130 presumably will have kids with IQ 115. For the same reason, genius kids don't have genius parents. The thing is that all our characteristics drive to average in population. At the same time, parents with average parameters have more chances to get kids with exceptional abilities. Considering previous facts, you may wonder, why then siblings are so different? I personally have a little sister and she's nothing like me, although we naturally have same parents and went to the same school. I bet many of you can relate. And yes, 50% we are the same, but 50% we are different. For example, an average difference in IQ test results of siblings is 13 points, which is not far from 17 points between randomly picked people. Before studying genetics, it was complicated for psychologists to explain why in the same environment brothers and sisters differ so much. Wrong upbringing was always to blame. Today, this burden of responsibility can be relieved and parents can relax a little. Studies show that no matter what experience a child had, with age, it will slowly come back to the path that its DNA dictates. Just think about it. You would be as much alike your sibling even if you were adopted in different families. One of the studies showed that the correlation between IQ test results between stepbrothers and sisters was 0.25 at age 8. 10 years later, the correlation was 0. This also confirms that with age, DNA gains momentum. Analyzing all that, it's easy to be discouraged. After years of self-development, to hear that it doesn't really matter that much is more than uncomfortable. But I'd like to mention that it's not a reason to give up working on yourself or justify yourself in an action or ruin your life saying that it's all predetermined and nothing really matters. Yes, we are drawn to the direction our genes tell us to go, but it doesn't mean that we are determined to become one or the other. We still have 50%. That's a large space for progress. Moreover, I find it even calming that no matter what, I follow my own unique path. And with age, I become more and more myself. Now, I leave you with your own thoughts about the topic. I hope it was amusing and you learned something new. And I hope you're not discouraged. So thank you for watching and I see you next time.